Hey y'all, and welcome back to another tutorial. Today I'll be showing you how to build these super detailed utility poles with working streetlights. Having details like this on your model layout will certainly take it to the next level of realism. Let's not waste any more time and get started building. Like most of my projects, I start by doing a little research on Google just to make sure I get the desired look I'm after. Once I have a good library of images, I can start designing. I'll be using some 3D printed objects for this build, which I designed and built using Tinkercad. It's a free, online and very easy to use CAD program. It's great for basic shapes, and with a bit of creativity, you can also get some quite complex designs as well. The streetlight, for example, was a bit more of a challenge, but in the end I was quite happy with the overall design. To print these tiny details, I used the Anycubic Photon Resin 3D printer. These details are so small that using a regular FDM 3D printer wouldn't work. All the files I use for these utility poles will be available on my website, and if you'd like to try building these yourself but don't have access to a Resin 3D printer, you could also try a 3D printing service like Shapeways to print the files for you. Once the printer is ready with the resin poured into the vat, it's just a simple matter of loading the file and pressing print. The finished parts are then removed from the build plate and cleaned in isopropyl alcohol. The first alcohol wash removes the bulk of the uncured resin. I gently agitate the alcohol for about 5 minutes as the uncured resin dissolves. The second wash helps remove any more residue from the surface, and just like the first wash, I leave them in there for about 5 minutes. After the parts are washed, they are left to dry. The alcohol evaporates pretty quickly, however to speed up the drying process a bit more, I use the airbrush to blow away the excess alcohol. Finally, the parts are left in a 3D printing curing chamber, also known as a UV nail lamp. They are left there for about 30 minutes to ensure the resin is fully cured before painting. It's important to clean the printer after it's been used. A paper towel and some isopropyl alcohol is all you'll need, and a quick wipe down will remove the resin. Just remember to avoid getting the uncured resin on your skin, as it is harmful, and if you do get some resin on your skin, just be sure to wash it off with warm soapy water. Although it's not recommended, the vat gets removed with the leftover resin still inside. I then place the vat inside a drawer where no UV light will get inside. It's left inside the drawer until I'm ready to print something else. Here is a list of all the components I'll be using to build the utility poles. Because I'll be making many utility poles, I design a template which will make it easier to build multiple poles that are all the same. Any drawing type program will work for this. I happen to use Corel Draw. The template I'm using here will also be available on my website for those wanting to have a go at this project. The main pole is made using 4.8mm diameter styrene tube. It is cut to about 13 cm long using the template as a guide. To add the look of a wooden utility pole, I carve out sections of the pole with a sharp hobby knife to create an uneven surface. It's only a subtle effect, however it makes a very big difference. Dragging the hobby knife along the surface like this helps remove any sharp edges left behind from the previous step. Then with some 120 grit sandpaper, I sand the utility pole, only sanding in a vertical direction. This helps introduce a wood grain look which will stand out when it's time to start painting. If you ended up with any unwanted holes like this, you can simply fill them in with some VALLEJO plastic putty. Once the putty has had time to dry, it can be sanded back and the hole will completely disappear. You can also do the same for the top of the pole as well. The cross arms are made using some HO scale 4x6 styrene. Again, the template is used to get the intended measurement, and the micromark chop it is used to cut it to length. Anytime I need to make multiple cuts all the same length, I'll use the chop it, and this is one good example. The position of the 3D printed insulators are marked along the top of each crossarm, and tiny 0.7mm holes are carefully drilled. I find using the sharp point of the hobby knife works easiest to get the hole started exactly in the centre of the beam. Then the last little bit is drilled out. There's really not much room for error here. Just like we did with the round pole, I add wood texture to the cross arms by dragging them over some 120 grit sandpaper. Before I use the template to help glue the cross arms to the poles, I attach it to something a little more rigid. Now again with some 3M Super 77, I just spray a very small amount of glue onto the template. Each cross arm is carefully placed, making sure that the small holes are pointed towards the top of the utility pole. Small spaces are also placed at the base using the 4x6 scale styrene. This helps ensure the pole sits flat against both cross arms, and a larger piece of styrene is placed right at the base so the bottom of each pole will butt up against the base. Tamiya plastic cement is applied in the center of each cross arm, and the pole is placed on top. Having a template definitely makes this process much easier and a lot faster. After about an hour, the plastic cement is dry and they can be removed. Just like we did before, the hole for the streetlight is started off using the hobby knife, and then the rest is drilled out using a 1.6mm drill bit. The bit is held on an angle as I drill in the direction that the streetlight will be positioned. Painting the utility pole is a 3-step process. Step 1 is painting the pole an earthy grey base colour. For this I ended up using VALLEJO Grey RLM02. I had quite a thin mixture from the airbrush, so I needed about 3 coats all up. Step 2 is the dry brushing of burnt umber, followed by off-white. A nice flat brush works best for this type of dry brushing. Start by getting a small amount of paint on the brush, and then using a paper towel wipe off any excess. Now simply drag the brush along the surface. Only a very small amount of paint gets applied, and it will generally stick to the raised surfaces with this technique. The same technique is applied with the off-white, however this final layer is applied more sparingly. The white is quite a strong colour, and you'll only need a very small amount to get the desired effect. The street light is assembled using 1.5mm K&S brass tube, cut to a length of about 3.7 centimeters. The small burr left behind from cutting will need to be filed away, and because we'll be threading the LED wires through the hole, the tube will need to be clear right the way through. The LEDs are 0.1mm SMD pre-wired LEDs from eBay. It may not look like it, but the copper wires have a thin layer of insulation. To help with threading the LEDs through the tube, I glue the wires together. Simply pulling the wires through some Helmer Super Tack glue is sufficient. Now it's much easier to push the wires through. The top of each light pole has a small bend. This brass tubing is thin enough that only using some round pliers is enough to bend the tube. It's much easier to thread the LED wire before putting the bend in the tube. To help prevent light leaking through the top of the light fixture, I give it a thick coat of black paint. Once the black is dry, I give it a coat of Tamiya grey primer, and later it will be painted the final metallic grey. Those multiple layers of paint should be enough to prevent the LED from causing the entire light fixture to glow. The light pole, LED and light fixture are carefully positioned so the LED is facing down. Super glue is used to glue the light pole to the light fixture. To speed up the drying process, a small amount of zip kicker is also applied once everything is being held in position. The metallic colour is achieved by airbrushing a 2:1 ratio of VALLEJO pale grey blue with silver RLM01. But first we need to mask the LEDs with some blue tack. Finally, once the light pole has been painted and the blue tack removed, a small amount of crystal clear is applied to the LED to simulate the clear light cover. All the detail parts that were 3D printed are also painted with the metallic grey colour. After they get painted, the intricate details really stand out and show just how much detail the resin 3D printers can achieve. To fix the light onto the pole, I used 5-minute epoxy. Once the LED wire has been threaded through the pole, the glue is mixed in a 1:1 ratio. A small drop is applied in the hole and the light is then pressed into position. I use the template again to ensure the light is positioned at the correct angle. While it's still on the template, I also add some of the extra detail like the brace for the light. It can be quite fiddly, but it's definitely worth the effort because these details are what really make the whole thing come together. All of the tiny details like the insulators and transformers are all super glued into position. I had some zip kicker on standby, however I didn't end up needing it as the super glue dried quite fast. This is the more time-consuming process, however because we took the time to drill out the small holes in the cross arms, the tiny insulators just press neatly into the holes. The cross braces are made using 0.4mm by 1mm styrene strip. Once they are glued, I use the chopper to help trim them to size at the right angle so they will sit properly up against the cross arms. Both of the transformers are glued onto the pole adjacent to the light, and the 4 fuses are glued down on the lower cross arm. The transformer wires are added using thin lead wire. This is definitely one of the more tricky details to add, but it makes all the difference. There are tiny holes in the top of the transformer, so once the lead wire finds the hole, I place it in and leave it until the glue dries. Once the glue is dry, I bend the wire so it connects up to the fuse. Any excess is trimmed away, and more super glue is used to hold the other end of the wire. The same process is applied to the wires that come out from the top of the fuses as well. The conduit that carries the grounding wires is also constructed using 0.75mm rod near the base and 0.5mm rod closer to the top. More of the thin lead wire is used to make the bracing along the length of the conduit. Excess is trimmed, and to hold the detail in place I use some Helmar Super Tack glue. To install the poles into the layout, I decided to make them semi-permanent. That way if you do decide to change things around, they are quite easy to remove. A length of tube is added to the base of each pole, about 2.5 centimeters long. Some of the 6.3mm tube is cut to a length of 3 centimeters. These lengths will depend on the thickness of your baseboard. A small stopper, 5mm long, is glued inside the bottom of the larger tube, and this forms the section that the utility pole will be installed into. Now this piece can be pressed into the baseboard in the desired location, and the utility pole has a very small drop of glue applied and is pressed into the hole. It's just enough glue to hold it, however with a small amount of force we can easily pull it free. Now the poles are installed, we can attach the wires to the battery. Just be sure to use the appropriate resistors depending on the power source you're using. I'm using a 9V battery for this demonstration, and I found a 2.2 kilo ohm resistor gives me the brightness I'm after. The very final detail to add are the wires. Fine black easy line is my product of choice for this. I start at one end and work my way along. I use super glue to attach the wire onto the first insulator because it holds very fast. Subsequent drops of glue along the line are done with Helmar Super Tack glue, because it's a little more forgiving and will give you about 30 seconds or so to make sure the tension on the line is just right. And we're done. As you can see, these utility poles look absolutely amazing once the electrical wires are attached, and it looks even better when the room lights are dimmed. The street lights on the utility poles really stand out. I hope you enjoyed watching this detailed tutorial on building fantastic looking utility poles. If you'd like to help support the channel and help me produce these types of videos, please don't forget to check out my Patreon page. Cheers, and thanks for watching.